Welcome to this morning's webinar on bottom-up management of extreme risk, presented by Glyn Davies, Training Manager, Waste Management New Zealand. I'm Nick Quilty from WasteMINZ. So the purpose of this webinar, which is based on Glyn's presentation at the 2016 WasteMINZ conference, is to discuss the complex role of managing critical risks in a hazard-rich environment. Glyn is responsible for the coordination of design, review and delivery of all operationally focused internal training programs at Waste Management New Zealand. He has been involved in employee safety for over 30 years in both the waste and logistics fields. The webinar will be approximately 60 minutes and will cover the complex world of risk management understanding, effective risk management at systems level, what our biggest risks really are, recognising the role of bias in risk management mitigation, and thinking is the key, engagement is the prize. There will then be about 15 minutes for Q&A after Glyn has presented. So I'll just go over the process for asking questions. So if everyone talked at once, that wouldn't be great. As such, we need to have a few protocols around questions. For ease, we will save all questions until the end of the webinar. We will have you all muted so no one can hear you to cut down on the line noise. So if you wish to ask a question, there is a raise your hand button on your GoToWebinar screen. Simply click on this button. Similarly, to lower your hand, just click this button again. When you click on the raise your hand button, it registers on our screen. When it's your turn to ask a question, we will unmute you and get you to ask your question. Please be aware that we intend to record the webinar and make this available on our website. So any questions you ask will also be recorded for completeness of discussion. But please don't let that put you off asking questions. So I'd like to thank Glyn for making today's presentation possible and now hand you over to him.
Good morning all. Thank you so much to WasteMINZ for organising this webinar, and thank you Nick and Paul. Thank you stakeholders for joining in. It's a real pleasure to talk to you and deliver this morning. On behalf of Waste Management, we have some strategies in place that we are rolling out over the next 12 months. We started last year, and we're calling it generational risk management. Generational meaning that it'll be passed on from generation to generation, hoping for sustainability in the system and sustainability of how we expect to manage risk going forward. We've split the risk profile into two major streams. There's the stream one, which is for everyone. It's level 1 risk management awareness. We've bolted it onto a position title. So that means that it's core training. No one can avoid it or get away with it, delay it or postpone it. So that's the first thing. Everyone must do risk awareness. And the second tier is aimed at managers, leaders and communicators. And that's level 2 risk management. And I'll explain how that is broken down as we go through the session. Look, I thought that we were limited to 30 minutes this morning. It's great that Nick's told me we've got an hour, so I'd like to give you plenty of time for questions, because there may be some questions coming out of this. So I'll just give you a brief background for of my work history. I was born and bred in the steel industry in Wales. I was thrown into the deep end at 16 years of age as an apprentice. I've been through extreme risk situations, as you can imagine, and I've seen plenty of accidents and incidents and fatalities in my 40-odd years in industry. I left the industry in Wales and came to New Zealand, ended up in the shipping industry and the engineering industry, the logistics industry, and now the waste industry. All those industries are risk without controls. We know that. We all know that. I've spent my entire career trying to get people to understand the risks that they take. This series, the second level series, which you're going to be getting a second level presentation on, is called Human Barriers for Our Managers. The Human Barriers series is based on cognition. It's all about thinking. It's all about how we think, how our people think, and trying to understand that. So that forms the basis for level 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the cognitive series. So I'm going to try and explain that as succinctly and as briefly as I can through this session, and I'll take questions later on, as Nick said. So the topics that we're going to just get some, there we are. The topics that we're going to be talking about is the Global Human Capital Trends Deloitte survey. I read this back to front every year. 2017 isn't out yet. I've done a search for it. I can't find it. I've been in touch with Deloitte, and they said it's still being put together. I find incredible information in the Capital Trends report. It tells us what corporates are thinking, what their problems are, and this really is where the generational risk management for waste management was born out of, is some of the information we find in those surveys. Talk about legislation and systems. What is our biggest asset? When you ask managers, what's your biggest asset? You can guarantee that the first thing that jumps to mind is the trucks and the plant and machinery. So we talk about that. I then let you see the way that we get information, the complex information, through to our people at coalface level, through the circular thinking process. And then we think about people's thinking. Cognitive bias is huge. We've all heard in the media over the last couple of months about unconscious bias. It's there. We all suffer from it. It's part of our evolution. Communication. I'll let you into the communication, the toolbox workshops that we have are based on evolution theory, and then we talk about interventions and nudges to try and get people to understand what risk is all about. The Global Human Capital Trends 2016 Deloitte mentioned that the structure of companies is changing, putting greater emphasis on empowered teams and team leadership. If you think of just those two terms alone, it's what we're trying to achieve in waste management: empowered teams and team leadership. Companies are becoming dependent on a new breed of empowering, supportive, and open leaders. There's a new generation of people coming through into the workforce called the millennials. We have to think differently as to how we treat people, how we engage people, and how we lead people. So those are the two major factors that we are focusing on in the training department for waste management. It's a complex world. After many, many years of standing up in front of adults and not lecturing, not preaching, but trying to get people to understand how this works, it is very difficult. It's highly complex: raw risk, residual risk, initial, low, acceptable, near miss. I know that people struggle with this because health and safety professionals struggle with it. So this is the type of concept that we're trying to get through to people. If we can't get that through, people walk out of the room, people carry on with their daily lives without having a full and thorough understanding of what we're trying to get them to think about. So that's the world we live in. That's what we have to manage. And things for us in this industry and past industries I've worked in are number 10, E-risk, without controls. How does the company, how does PCBU, how does waste management manage risk? Well, that's what we do. These, as you know, were born out of catastrophic events such as Flixborough disaster, Savenco disaster. Legislation drives us in this way. We have to have systems in place, complex systems in many cases, to plan the context, identify, assess, manage, review, communicate, and govern. And they're all based on tasks. Our industry is completely task-oriented, completely. All, not much AI at all. It's coming, but at this point in time, we're all based on tasks. We have to list them, assess them, control them, develop them, and that is what our focus is on, is the actual task that people are doing outside of any controlled environment. When they're on their own, when they're in a yard, when they are at a landfill, when they are next to picking up a bin, we need them to understand the risk based around the individual tasks that we ask them to do. How does the branch measure risks? Well, we've all got these type of matrices, almost certain, insignificant, significant, rare. This, if we present that in itself to a group of people, most people see it as just a pretty color sheet. We've got to get through the quantified risk of what is the likelihood and what is the consequence. Most of the risk, as I say, is up in the 25 for us, and most of the industries that we work in, we need to get that risk down to at least 19 to be able to function and rest easy. So that's the matrix. How does the branch control the risk? Well, we control it through the hierarchy of controls: eliminate, substitute, isolate, engineer. We can't employ the top one. There's not many chances in our industry to eliminate, for example, reversing. Substitute, we can do that with some of our chemicals. Isolate, we can do it with barriers and such. Engineer, our trucking fleet, constantly engineering safety systems into our machinery. And then administer and use of PPE. Most of the controls that we have are down in the latter two, which are, as we know, are the weakest form of defense. Administer through work instructions and put protective equipment on. One of the things that's very important there, and it's quite often missed and it's in blue, is consult and communicate with all workers and their representatives. That is my style of risk management reduction. It's all about communication with our people and getting them to understand exactly the risks that they are exposing themselves to and their families and their livelihood. One of the reports, I think it was a 2014 report from Deloitte, mentioned that engagement is one of the highest priorities of all the corporates that they had surveyed. It was something, it was a huge percentage of people wanting engagement, but only a small percentage of corporates were understood how to engage. It went something like 80% down to 40% understood, or 40-odd% knew how to go about engagement. That was difficult for me. Someone said to me, Glenn, I need you to engage this person because they've checked out. The way that I would go about it is by transposing the word engagement into thinking. If we alter that around, where engagement is thinking, thinking is engagement, it makes the task much easier. So someone says, Glenn, I need you to get this person engaged. The first thing I do is get them to think about what we're doing. Once I realized that, the thinking part then became the easy side of the risk management program. The system that we've just talked about, but for the PCBU, the branch matrix, the whole lot, will do nothing to engage our people. If they don't know why they're doing it, if they don't know why they're attending Toolbox, if they don't know why that we've given them procedures and PPE, they won't use it and they won't acknowledge it. That's the fact that I've noticed through many interactions and audits, is that if they don't understand it, they won't use it. One of the points at the start was, what is our biggest asset? Like I say, most people turn around and say trucks, plant, machinery, buildings. But in my view, the biggest asset that we can possibly have is not the operators, but the way the operators think. And it pays to know how your people think, not how you think they think, because risk management is rarely front of mind. Most people in organizations think of productivity, of satisfying some kind of criteria. We have to get people engaged through thinking process as to how they're doing the task and how they're managing the risk on that task. Cognition. What is it? The mental action of process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. This is the way we think. We get experience. That's one of the best ways to learn, is through experience. Unfortunately, some of the experiences that our people are subjected to are not good. They are life-threatening. So the word before it is the thought. If you think properly, your experience will be totally different. So what we've done is we've put the whole concept into a circle. It's the simplest form. It's nothing complex about it. When we train on risk management and educate on risk management, we ask people to think. Think about the hazards in the first quadrant of the circle. Think about the risk, because most of our hazards, if not all, are in the E-risk category. Think about the controls that the company has to put in place, the organization has to try and eliminate, or it has to minimize. Then the system, the safety system that you use to educate, train, and communicate with the people. Once you get people understanding why we're asking them to fill in a JSCA, why we're asking them to do a safety interaction, why we're asking them to come to Toolbox, because the other three parts of the circle have been identified, assessed, and controlled, they finally realize why all this stuff is in place. The hazards that we're exposed to, once you bullet point the hazards as we do in our risk management training, it is terrifying. You can see where people, the light goes on, they understand what we're trying to do, and they start thinking. And I was saying earlier this morning that you always need to make risk relevant to people's lives, because there's stuff going on in all our thinking that will dismiss the risk. Then you can put what you like at the center of this health and safety risk circle. You can put the governance side of it for the board. You can put the quality side of it for customer service. Everything fits into the circle. A breach of the perimeter of the circle is a failure. For instance, did you identify the hazards? And I always put the words after it, no, Your Honor. Did you identify the hazards? Yes, Your Honor. Did you put a risk on them? No, Your Honor. All the no's and all the perimeter failures are fixable. Did you identify? Yes. Did you put a risk on it? Yes. Did you put controls in place? Yes. Why did the person get injured? Because he wasn't at the toolbox session, because he was on leave. So this circle makes perfect sense to the people we have working for us and in the organization. It just makes it so easy for people to understand. Think about people in another way. We can't solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. We are having body stress in slip, trip, fall, accidents, incidents right throughout industry continuously. And I was saying to Nick earlier, it'll be interesting after 12 months of this new legislation to see if these hazards have been controlled in a better way than they were prior to the 2015 changes. These are the numbers that we have to deal with. These are all our biggest risk. Like I say, in waste management and other industries, this is what people do. They lift, push, pull, carry, throw. If we could get this under control, this one single hazard under control, by getting people to think about how they act, climb, push, pull, carry, then we're halfway there, more than halfway there. We are not tapping into something that we've got. The earlier slide said that we need to tap into the thinking process of how humans operate. Humans are highly complex thinkers. This, some of you may have read this little story about AlphaGo, a supercomputer that took on Lee Sedol. He beat the computer in 1 game out of 4, I think it was. AlphaGo has 10 to the 171 possible moves, yet a human being still beat the computer in 1 go because the computer has less intelligence than a 5-year-old in making decisions. This is what we need to tap into with our people. We have, every person out there is a supercomputer. Every person is capable of complex thought, of analyzing, if they only put their thinking process into the right gearing system. And that's really what our whole generational risk management platform is all about, especially the cognition series. Getting leaders and communicate to understand that if you can engage your people, then life will be so much easier and people will be so much safer. 2.5 petabytes of information, that's what we can store. 1 million gigabytes. If I said to an IT guy the other day, if I give you a 1 million gigabyte computer, what would you do with it? And he laughed. But we've got them there. They're all in our vehicles, on our landfills, driving our trucks. So then we come to the cognitive side of it and the bias that we all have. Confirmation bias. We only believe what we already think. We push this really hard in waste management because BP Horizon, when they had their explosion that almost brought BP to its knees, they were unsure of removing the drill. They knew there was something wrong, but they put it down to something called the bladder effect. So this has happened before. It usually doesn't cause anything, and then they ended up with catastrophic failure because it come back and bit them. We all do this. We don't think it's going to happen to us. We ignore the small stuff, and if it's a good result, then we get a dopamine shot. Outcome bias. When obvious things going wrong, your people recognize it. When little things go wrong, but with good outcomes, they ignore it more and more. Near misses or failures are ignored. It's only when catastrophe strikes that we wake up. By then, it's too late. This is called outcome bias. Now, I've got a fantastic quote that I normally throw in to groups that I'm talking to. We can avoid reality, but we can't avoid the consequences of reality. That was by a Russian-American novelist, philosopher, a guy called Ayn Rand. She was brilliant. I've read a bit of her work. There's nothing more true than that. We can avoid reality, but we can't avoid the consequences of reality. If we can get people to think in that way, they'll understand that climbing on top of their truck without fall arrest gear is not the way to go. And then we have the other biases. Now, this is a list of many, many biases that we all have. In-group bias. That's the one where we all get this shot of oxytocin, which makes us all feel great and part of the unit. Then we get observational selection bias. I don't have to go into these. We all know them. Neglect impossibility bias. People seem to think that they're going to die in a plane just because they fly in, but the reality of it is that you're probably more than likely to die in a car accident on your way to work than in a plane. We overstate the small risk and we underrate the extreme risks in our lives. It's what we do. It's how we evolved. It's the way we survive. The best management tool you will ever have are thinking, engaged, empowered people. This is the Socratic oath that we use, the Socratic saying, can't teach anyone anything, I can only make them think. That is the start of our training sessions, and that is the end of our training sessions. If people leaving the room are thinking about what you've delivered or what the message that you've tried to put through, then you've won the battle. You've set someone off in their daily work, and they're going to be thinking, engaged in what they're doing, the tasks that they're doing. So the first couple of points said that we are targeting what the Deloitte's survey said, which is empowering leaders and teams. How do we do that? We do it basically through toolbox talks. It's our only form of communication with many of the people that work on their own, drive vehicles, operate at lonely sites. We need to communicate in a better way to everyone. So we put together a called the evolution theory model of communication, where we have variation, selection, and inheritance. These are workshops. The variation selection workshop is 6 hours long. We have 25 to 30 people involved, so there's 5 teams of 6 or 5 fives, whatever. We go through the variation of styles that are delivered at Toolbox, what methods people use, how they communicate. As you can imagine, we have great communicators and we have poor communicators. We have non-communicators in our business, as you guys do. We find the variation, we identify it, and we select it in workshops as to who's doing the best, what they came up with, and then that's put into practice. And then 6 months later, we have an inheritance workshop where people can discuss what they did, how they did it, what results they got, and the changes that were identified in their group. We also do a survey on there that I haven't mentioned. So when the groups leave the variation selection workshop, they go out, they hand forms out to their people. The people tick them as to their understanding of risk, and then when we have the inheritance workshop, we give them the results of that, and we try and change it through a measured indicator, which is surveys. So that's fairly new. We didn't start it until June last year, and we are still going through it with all the different business units now. So that's really exciting. It's great fun to deliver to that communication model. We fail to communicate properly, no matter what training is carried out, and I've seen this myself. I leave the room and you get people engaged, and then a week later you see the person that you were talking in front of or talking to, and they said, well, it doesn't actually work the way that you said, Glenn. So there's a way to overcome the unconscious workings of the human mind. This biases. Leaders and supervisors and communicators are the key, because this is a battlefield. You can't just walk away from it. Your generals can't just forget about what they're trying to achieve. So you take this one, for example, for a cognition quote. I want this work completed to a very high standard and with a high safety component, but I want it done in less time. Just that statement alone has set up a psychological hazard in people's thinking, which gives them cognitive dissonance. They have no idea what you want. They don't know if you want it done safely. They know that you want it done in less time. So you've completely disengaged that person just by those words that you've said. If you try another approach, if you were to go along the line of dollars, time, quality, and safety, it won't work. People pick it up. People pick up your motive. People pick it up through your speech, your communication. If you are genuine in your safety, quality, time, and dollars, it works every time. People pick that up. I want this work completed to a very high standard and with a high safety component. How do you think we can complete it in a reasonable time? Just those words alone has created cognitive balance. And even the love molecule, what they call the neurotransmitter oxytocin, is released. It makes people feel better. It engages them. It gives them a good understanding of where you are coming from. Everyone's on the same playing field. Everyone's engaged. So just those two separate statements alone can either make or break a relationship between your leader and the person who is being led. Lastly, in the generational risk model, we talk about nudges and interventions. Now, these are a kind of a new thing that's going around the planet. we've all seen them before, we've all done them, our parents did them to us. A nudge is a concept in behavioral science that argues positive reinforcement and direct suggestion. So that's your stop, look, assess, manage, and your signage and everything else. We're going a little step further in waste management. We're trying to get wise psychological interventions in place. When we get a hazard alert, we analyze it for what message can we give from the hazard alert through our communication system, whereby it creates longer lasting changes in a person's thinking. One of the things that have lasted in so many people throughout waste management is what I call a skittle. Now, the picture on the right-hand corner, bottom right-hand corner of the slide, shows a person standing in the middle of the road under those conditions, waiting for the traffic to clear. And I call them skittles. Now, skittles are mentioned by me in every risk management session, and the amount of people that come up to me months later, years later, and say, do you know that talk about skittles? It stuck with me forever. It's called a wise psychological intervention. It's so deep-seated in the brain that it'll be with you forever. You'll change your behavior because of that intervention. I see it going on. As winter comes on, I've got a place just up in Forest Hill there where I drive to work every morning, and there's people standing in the middle of the road under those conditions. Our people do it as well. We have to get through in better ways than we do than just writing a procedure to stop people doing that. They have to think for themselves. Near misses, the Bird's Triangle, 2,240,000, 20,400, and then the big one. We've gone a step further than the unsafe acts. They are observable if you can catch people. We've gone into another area with our cognitive training where we go for the thinking before the unsafe act. This huge volume underneath the water level is what we're trying to target, the human thinking process. This is observable. This is invisible. This is where our cognition series comes in for risk management, where we try and ask our managers and leaders and supervisors and communicators to think about this when they're delivering messages or when they are analyzing investigations. How did the human think? Why did the human being do what they did? Most humans don't do it to get killed. It's not a regular thing. Most people do it because it was either human error or they thought they were doing the right thing. So we're drilling right down below the triangle, Bird's Triangle. We're drilling down into the invisible thinking process of our people. We need to make it part of everyday life, make it part of the way you and your people operate. The likelihood and the consequence, people quite often don't understand. If they did know the consequences, they wouldn't do what they do. And the likelihood is affected by the biased thinking that we all have. It's not going to happen to me. I've done it before. I don't hit power lines. The guy who did that was an idiot. This is the type of stuff that we are drilling down to in our risk management generational series and the workshops that we do. Overcome or control the biases we all have in our thinking process and create a thinking culture for better people engagement. And that's it from me, Nick.
Thanks very much, Glenn. That was a great presentation. I learned a lot from it. So that's awesome. So I'm just going to go over Q&A just one final time before we start that. So you're all muted, so no one can hear you to cut down on the line noise. If you wish to ask a question, there's a raise your hand button on your GoToWebinar screen, and simply click on this button. Similarly, to lower your hand, just click this button again. And when you click on the raise your hand button, it registers on our screen. So when it's your turn to ask a question, I will unmute you and get you to ask a question. So I'm just going to put that out there. So I've just got all the people that I know that are on the line. So if you have a question, you just need to press that raise your hand button and I will unmute you. So don't be shy. I know it can be a bit tricky when you're on a webinar to be the first one to ask a question. Does anyone have a question that they would like to start with? And I'll give you a couple of seconds. Right, David Stevenson. So I'm just going to unmute you, David. There you go. So David, do you want to go ahead?
Thanks, Nick. Thanks very much, Gwen. That was really interesting. Sort of quite high level. Just one thing I noticed in passing, you just driving into detail, you talked about reversing, and that seems to be a risk that we are really conscious of. And it was an interesting comment I heard you say that we can't avoid it there. Could you sort of go into a little bit more detail around that?
Well, the best thing, of course, is to eliminate the hazard, and reversing as elimination of reversing, so meaning that the truck or the vehicle is going to go into reverse. I've never been able to find a way out of it other than to take the reversing gear out of the gearbox or put a gate in so that the machine can't reverse. We have to live with that. Some of our front load drivers reverse hundreds of times a day. It's something we have to live with in our industry, in the courier industry. All industries are the same, especially logistics. We have to manage that. We have to manage the reversing hazard, and the only way you can do it is by people thinking not just now and again about reversing, but every single time they reverse. It's the time that they don't think, the time that they reverse with a blind spot, the time that they reverse because the camera wasn't working or the wing mirror wasn't adjusted properly, is the time that you hit someone or hit a building. So that's a really great hazard that sticks out a mile for most industries. Is how do you manage the reversing hazard? And it has to be a task-based level, because no one's in the truck with the guy, no one's in the car with the person. They're going to reverse back and they're going to take a chance quite often, which is what people do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, thanks. I guess it's the challenge is to keep people thinking about it 8 hours a day.
Yeah, look, and this is one of the things we talk about in our workshop, is that there's a function within the human brain called habituation, which is what we do. If I was to give you a menial task, a boring task, you would soon habituate to that task because it's taking an enormous amount of energy from your brain. The brain uses 25% of the body's energy. So you're going to find ways of how to stop using all that energy, and you'll go into automatic mode. That is when we need people to get out of that mode, understand what they're doing, and understand what their own brain is doing, and focus back on the job. So that's really into the cognition stuff that we're trying to get people to understand how we operate as humans. It's you're right, it is high level, but as Einstein said, we can't keep with the problems with the same way of fixing it that we've always done if it's not being fixed. So we are going for that deep thinking, deep understanding of how we operate level.
So is that okay, David? Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, no, that's great, thanks. I'll hand over to someone else.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, David. If you just want to, where you've got your raise your hand button, if you just want to press on that again, and then, okay, perfect. Now, there was someone else who put their hand up, Dave Surgenvin, and I'm sorry if I've completely mispronounced your name, but then I see you took your hand away. But if you have a question, just put your hand up again. No? Okay, so does anyone else? Oh, yes, here we go. Dave, I'll just unmute you. There we go. Yes, there we go.
Okay, great presentation. Thanks very much, Glenn. We fully understand the concept, and it looks great. But how do we deal with temporary staff?
Yeah.
Our industry contracts that we have, and just the nature of the business, contractors use a lot of temporary staff.
Look, one of the things that will manage generators or a contractor better than any risk management tool you have is the culture within the business. If you have a culture within your business based on generational risk management, and the person comes in and doesn't behave to the standard at which you have achieved within your business, it will self-govern. So we get a lot of casual labor as well that will come to our landfills and our transfer stations. And the hope is, and the reality quite often is that the people, the permanent people working in the organization will care for and monitor the new people coming in, because to have someone supervising continuously is virtually impossible. But if you've got the right culture, the right thinking, engaged culture, it will self-monitor. They will look after the person. They will tell them the way things need to be done. We don't do that around here. Just remember this, just remember that. It's the way, and a lot of this comes from my background in the steel industry. At 16 years of age, going into the furnace area, I wasn't allowed to move unless I was behind one of the journeymen or one of the skilled hands. You weren't allowed to leave the workshop unless you had supervision at that basic level. That's the way risk was managed in those days. We have to formalize it more these days. We have to have all these new terms, culture, thinking, engagement, but that's basically what it is. It's almost like parenting. You know, you don't send your children off to school on their first day on their own. They're taken to school, they're taken through a procedure. My kids didn't actually have a JSEA, but they had something similar. And it is self-governing. It's what we do. If we have the right culture and the right engaged workforce, those one-offs will be managed by the group with in-group thinking. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep.
Perfect. Have you got anything else, Dave, that you want to ask?
Yeah. Yeah, I quite agree. But we do have a lot of lone workers. But I understand the principles of it. You know, you've got to have a good system to start with and good engagement, which will have that flow-on effect. And so, yeah, I understand that.
We've got a 5-year plan for this, Dave. It's not an easy fix. Management of risk never is. Big organization, leading organizations around the world, they have huge plans for this. It takes many, many years until you bed in a culture of thinking. And in my experience then of the way groups operate, the group itself will then weed out the people who are not conforming to the standards of that group. Once you have that critical mass, your group or your organization will then exponentially grow with this risk management strategies. It's just kind of self-fulfilling. It's amazing. I've seen it.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree with you. But for organizational and cultural change, that comes from the top. And so whilst our biggest asset is operations on the ground, all too often our weakest link is the middle and upper management, from my experience. But yeah, great presentation.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Anything else?
Thanks.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. Okay, great. So does anyone else have any questions? No, no one's got their hand up.
Look, just to slip one in about what I would have liked to. Have we got a bit of time, haven't we, Nick?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, when we do those workshops, we send people off with, after variation selection, we send people off into the back of Beyond, and they all go back to their sites, and then they get a hazard alert that comes through, and there's an expectation then that they're going to look at this hazard alert and they're going to get out all these wise psychological interventions and nudges and stuff. That's not happening in reality. So what we have is we have a mentoring system whereby the hazards alerts are gone over, they are discussed, we put down what we think should be delivered at Toolbox, and then we send that out to the different teams and the communicators of those workshops, just saying in the email that this is the way I would deliver this, or this is the message we need to get out of this. This is the learning point. So we give people the tools to be able to deliver high value communication toolbox talks, and then that then can be measured at the end of the day, I hate the end of the day, at the end of the process, by asking our people those 5 questions that we ask them. Do you think of risk all of the time? Often, not often, rarely, never. We ask those questions continuously of the business units through surveys to find out if we are getting incremental change in our people's thought patterns. And we are seeing change in some of the surveys. I've got to do another survey of the middle of the island soon, and that really gives you an idea of whether you are, where your communication is getting through and people are thinking.
Okay, so any other questions? I'll just give you a couple of seconds if you want to raise your hand. No? Okay, so that looks like it's it. Thank you so much, Glenn. That was an awesome presentation, and thanks everyone for attending. So the webinar has been recorded, and it will be available on our website in the next couple of days. Glenn is available if you want to ring him on mobile, 021 918 769. 021 918 769 if you want to ask him any further questions. You will be sent a feedback form on the webinar, and I would really encourage you to complete this because we're always trying to improve. So thank you once again.